What I wanted to talk to you about today are three pieces of advice that I have for parents who are looking to start homeschooling their child who is a struggling learner. Now, I am not just talking to you as a homeschool coach on this. My own children have some learning issues, and it is one of the many reasons that we decided to homeschool our kids. One thing to keep in mind as you are homeschooling any kind of child is the fact that when we think about how we as parents want to learn, we often tend to start in that direction and think, well, gosh, if I could do it all over again and be homeschooled, I would love to have it look like this. Just because that's the way that suits you does not necessarily mean that is the way that is going to fit your children. So when you're looking at all of your options for how you are going to homeschool your child, you're definitely going to want to keep them in mind when it comes to deciding how exactly you are going to deliver that education. So my first piece of advice, it is doubly important for parents like us. We have got to deschool ourselves first. And if your child has spent any time in conventional school, chances are they're going to need a lot of deschooling time too, because it is very likely that school has not been a positive experience for them, that they have struggled mightily because the schools do not teach in the way that they need to learn. Just trying to make it through the day was an act of survival. They weren't really in a mindset to be able to learn. When you bring them home, just because now they get to learn in their pajamas on the couch does not suddenly fix all of those negative feelings that they have towards education. So you really need to make sure that they have a nice block of time in which they can detox from conventional school and start rediscovering their own natural curiosity and love of learning. And you also need to deschool so that you can learn how to think outside the box and how to separate the concepts of conventional learning and that whole philosophy from how children actually learn, whether they have learning struggles or not, and what education can actually look like, all the different ways that that can look. Because once you've gotten that mindset, that conventional mind school out of your head, that conventional mind school mindset out of your head, it's easier for you to think outside the box when delivering your child's education to them. And when we have struggling learners, we often really have to think outside the box. My second piece of advice is to fight that urge to focus on their weaknesses. When we look at our children, we tend to think, oh, we really need to work on that. And oh my gosh, they're still really struggling with this. And oh, they're never going to learn how to do this if we're not spending a lot of time on it. And so we tend to want to focus their education on the areas where they're weak because we want to help them shore those up. We want to help make them stronger in those areas. But can you imagine how it would feel if every single day your spouse came to you and only focused on the negative parts of your relationship? How draining and depressing would that be, right? It is no different for our kids. I have a dyslexic daughter, and if all we ever did was focus on reading, not only would she hate learning, she would hate me. It would destroy our relationship. And do you think she would be particularly motivated to learn if all I was ever doing was talking about her weaknesses? No, we have got to focus on their strengths because here's the truth. When they go out into the world, they need to be able to capitalize on their strengths to make up for their weaknesses, which is what all of us do. We're all weak in certain areas. And so we look for hacks and tricks and things that are going to help us to get through life with the weaknesses that we have. And we want to do the same with our kids. We want to help them enjoy learning. We want to help them to see themselves as successful learners. And the best way to do that is to focus on their strengths and then use those strengths to help them shore up their weaknesses. And the older they get and the more we help them form a positive self-image, both as a learner and just as a human being, it is going to give them the confidence to look at their weaknesses and say, okay, I've got some issues I need to work on. I am secure enough now in my view of myself to be able to tackle these without having it ding my self-image and make me struggle all the time. My last piece of advice would be to remind parents to keep a reasonable perspective of their child. As parents, we need to step back and we need to ask ourselves, what is the reasonable outcome of them never getting any better at this? Like, let's just take the worst case scenario. Let's say my child never reads beyond the point where they are right now. Does that actually mean that they're never going to be successful? They're never going to be able to do anything with their lives? Okay, no. Obviously not, right? Obviously, our children are going to have all sorts of other strengths and areas of ability that they can draw on. And obviously, our children are going to engage in activities that are going to touch on these areas of weakness, and it's going to incrementally help them work on those things over time. And again, when we help our children to form a confident view of themselves and a growth mindset that shows them, hey, there is no deadline on your learning. It's not like you hit 18 and the education that you have is all the education you're ever going to have. If we help our children to have a growth mindset, then it doesn't matter what they struggle with. They'll know that they can always fix those things. They're eventually going to hit something that is probably going to require them to really face that struggle head on. And if they have a growth mindset, they're going to know, okay, you know what? The time has come that I really have to address this. I cannot get any further in my job. I cannot get any further in my education. I cannot get any further in XYZ until I improve this. And then they'll be so intrinsically motivated to do it. Not only will they start to work on those things, but their learning will actually happen faster because when you are intrinsically motivated, all of your faculties are pointed in the direction of figuring this thing out, as opposed to having an adult come to you and say, I know it doesn't seem relevant to you right now, but you need to learn how to do this. If somebody came into your face every day and forced you to do something, to work on something that you did not see any relevance for, do you think you would be fully focused on that task and motivated to get any better at it? No, you'd be like, why is this person forcing their ideas on me? I don't want to learn about this right now. Your mind would wander. You'd get irritated. You wouldn't focus. You'd want to just do what you need to do to get it done. You wouldn't really learn. If we help our children to focus on their strengths and to have a growth mindset, then we know they will have what they need in the future to get better in these areas where they struggle. So we as parents need to take a step back. And we need to take a deep breath and we need to say, you know what? Chances are that the level that my 9-year-old is at right now is not the level they're going to be at when they're 19, right? A lot can happen in 10 years. A lot can happen in 5 years. A lot can happen in 2 years. For a lot of kids, they just need to kind of hit a kind of a growth spurt, not physically, but mentally or emotionally, developmentally. And when they do that, all of a sudden, it tends to kind of unlock some new barriers, things that were, that they were kind of constantly ramming their head up against. They just couldn't get past those. And then all of a sudden one day, those barriers seem to be gone. This is what happened when my daughter was younger and I was the parent who did not have perspective. I looked at my 7-year-old. She was only 7, you guys. But I was so stressed out about the fact that she still couldn't read basic words. And I convinced myself my child was never, ever, ever going to read unless I sat down with her and I forced her to work on this over and over for hours every day. You guys, she is now 14 years old, and I am still having to undo the damage that I caused by that year of homeschooling her that way. All the tears, all the sadness, all the crying with me insisting that she figure out how to do this now. I look back and I realize her brain was not ready. She was not unlocked. She did not have all of the skills yet that she needed. And with the way that her little dyslexic brain worked, what I needed to do was to give her lots of space to assimilate what she had learned after we had focused for maybe 2 or 3 months on reasonable amounts of reading practice, little bite-sized practices for 2 or 3 months, and then step back for 3 or 4 months. And then every time we'd come back after one of these big breaks, she would have had this huge leap in ability. And it wasn't that we were, surreptitiously working on reading with her. It's just that she had no choice but to interact with print. She loved to bake. She had to use a recipe. She loved the Breath of the Wild video game. And there were tons of subtitles. The only way she could advance in that game was by reading those, figuring out what they said. So she was constantly intrinsically motivated to learn, and I didn't have to push at all. And so between these big chunks of time when I just let all of that stuff that I'd taught her kind of marinate in her brain and her interacting with print on her own terms, she would have these massive explosions in her reading ability. And now she's 14 years old. She hates to read. I own that. That is my fault. I caused my child to hate reading. I really did. But she loves books. She loves when I read to her. She loves listening to audiobooks. I consider that a win. So keep a reasonable perspective. Remember that a lot can change in just a few years. And that the way the world is going, there is so much adaptive technology that even if the worst comes to worst and your child really doesn't ever grasp anything beyond this, there will be technology that will help them to adapt and to overcome those struggles and to make up for those struggles that they have so that they can still go on to do great things. I'm going to link below to my article on homeschooling kids with unique learning challenges. And there's a download that you can access through that article that gives all sorts of homeschooling resources for a whole variety of issues. I hope if you have a struggling learner that this has been encouraging for you. You really can do this. I know it seems like a big, overwhelming task, but you are up to it and you can do it. And I'm here to help you. Reach out, let me know how I can. Have a great day. I'll talk to you later. Bye.